Hi everyone, welcome back to our channel where stories aren't just told, they're felt. If you're someone who believes in empathy, hope, and second chances, you're in the right place. What would you do if two little girls with tears in their eyes asked you to be their dad for just one day? And in saying yes, you uncovered a secret that would change all of your lives forever. Before we dive into the full story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share more stories of resilience, unexpected miracles, and lives that find hope when it seems all but gone. Every click counts and every story matters. Now, let's begin. It was a brisk spring afternoon in Boston when the laughter of children poured from the playground of Trinity Academy. The schoolyard was alive with the chatter of classmates discussing their costumes, their songs, and the upcoming Family Day presentation, a day when every child would stand on stage and proudly point to the smiling faces of their loved ones in the crowd. Every child, except two. 7-year-old twins Lily and Grace Carter sat on a weathered wooden bench near the old brick wall of the school, their feet swinging above the pavement, not quite long enough to reach the ground. The sounds of excitement around them only deepened their silence. Lily, the bolder of the two, stared at a crack in the ground and kicked a pebble toward the fence. "Everyone's bringing their parents," she muttered, her voice sharp with frustration. "Everyone will have someone cheering for them." Grace, softer, gentler, drew patterns on the dusty bench with her fingertip. "We'll have Mom," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. They both knew their mother, Rachel, had already told them she couldn't come. The cafe where she worked during the day was short-staffed, and the restaurant where she worked evenings couldn't afford to lose her on a Friday morning. Rent had gone up again. The bills were piling, and even if she wanted to, Rachel couldn't risk losing either job. The girls didn't blame her, but that didn't make it any easier. Lily's sneakers, once white, now scuffed gray and frayed at the edges, scraped the ground as she muttered, "Even Tommy's dad is taking the day off, and he can't even sing without sounding like a frog. And we'll be the only ones standing up there. Alone." Her voice cracked on the last word. Before Grace could reply, a sleek black car pulled up across the street, its windows tinted its surface, gleaming like a mirror under the afternoon sun. A man stepped out, tall, early 30s, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that contrasted sharply with the grit of the old Boston street. His wristwatch gleamed, his shoes spotless, his expression tense as he glanced at his phone. He looked out of place, too polished, too important for this corner of Beacon Hill. Lily nudged her sister. "Look at him," she whispered. "He looks rich." Grace's brow furrowed, or lost. The man began pacing, phone pressed to his ear, frustration flickering across his face as he barked instructions to someone unseen. "No, tell them to wait. I'll be there in 20 minutes, tops." His voice was clipped, impatient. When he hung up, he rubbed the bridge of his nose as if fighting a headache, his sharp features briefly softening in the golden afternoon light. Lily watched him for a moment longer, her mind whirring. Something about him, his presence, his certainty, ignited a spark of an idea. She stood abruptly. "Come on." Grace looked up, startled. "Where are you going to talk to him?" Grace's eyes widened. "What? No, Mom said not to talk to strangers. He's not dangerous. Look at him. People like that don't hurt kids in broad daylight. Besides, I just have a feeling." Lily grabbed Grace's hand and tugged her toward the school gate. Reluctantly, Grace followed, glancing back as though expecting a teacher to stop them. They crossed the street slowly, the hum of the city around them. The man noticed them as they approached, his brows knitting in mild surprise. Two identical girls in faded school uniforms, their light brown hair tied in uneven ponytails, their eyes fixed on him like they were approaching a celebrity or a lifeline. "Are you lost?" Lily asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. She tilted her chin up, unafraid, while Grace hung slightly behind her. The man's expression softened. A little, he admitted, sliding his phone into his pocket. "I'm looking for a company nearby." "I knew it," Lily said with a shrug. "You look like someone important. Businessman or something." He chuckled, a brief, genuine sound. "You're very observant. What are your names?" "I'm Lily. This is Grace. We're twins." I gathered that he said, amused. There was something disarming about their honesty. "And I'm Ethan Cole." Grace, still hovering behind her sister, finally spoke. Her voice was a whisper, gentle and shy. "That's a nice name." "Thank you," Ethan replied, crouching slightly so he wasn't towering over them. "But you shouldn't be talking to strangers." "You don't look dangerous," Lily countered. "And everyone can see us. It's not like we're going anywhere." Her gaze drifted to his watch, then back to his face. She hesitated only for a second before blurting out, "We have a presentation at school this Friday. Family Day. Our mom can't come. She works 2 jobs. We'll be the only ones on stage with no one to clap for us." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. The directness of the child's words, her vulnerability wrapped in matter-of-fact delivery, hit harder than he expected. Grace took a deep breath, her eyes meeting his for the first time. "Would you? Maybe?" She faltered, and Lily jumped in, finishing for her. "Would you be our dad, just for one day, just to sit there, clap, and make it look like we're not alone?" The question hung in the air, absurd, yet heartbreakingly simple. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. These were strangers, 2 little girls with big, pleading eyes, and yet staring at their scuffed shoes, and the hope trembling in their voices. He felt something stir in him. Something he hadn't felt in years. And in that quiet moment on a busy Boston street, with the faint echo of church bells ringing from Beacon Hill in the distance, Ethan Cole realized his day and perhaps his entire life was about to change. That evening, Ethan Cole sat in the corner suite of the Liberty Hotel, staring out at the faint glow of Boston's skyline. The sound of distant traffic and the muted hum of the television filled the room, but his thoughts were far from the world outside. He was a man accustomed to making decisions worth millions in seconds, a man whose calendar was controlled down to the last minute by an assistant. Yet the simple, unfiltered question of 2 little girls, "Would you be our dad for one day?" had followed him like a ghost since he left them. He'd told himself it wasn't his problem. He had a meeting with investors at dawn, a flight back to New York in 2 days, and a deal that could expand his company's reach across Europe. There was no space in his meticulously structured life for a school auditorium, let alone the weight of someone else's children. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Grace's downcast gaze and Lily's defiant chin as she asked for something that shouldn't feel so monumental, someone to stand in the crowd to clap. He poured himself a glass of water, trying to drown out the gnawing ache in his chest. It wasn't their faces alone haunting him. It was what they reminded him of years ago, before the tailored suits, before Cole Innovations was a household name. He had grown up in a place where no one came to school events. The Pine Grove Orphanage in rural Maine didn't offer doting parents or warm applause. Ethan still remembered sitting on a metal folding chair at a Christmas recital, watching other kids run into their parents' arms while he sat alone, clutching a paper snowflake craft as if it could fill the void. On the desk beside him sat a small cardboard box he hadn't opened in years. It had been delivered that morning from the Pine Grove Foundation, a package of mementos they'd saved from his childhood, as they closed the old building for good. Curiosity had made him slice it open earlier, and now, at the top of the stack lay a weathered postcard. The handwriting was neat but fading. "You're not alone, even if it feels that way." It had been signed by a volunteer whose face Ethan could no longer picture someone who had come to the orphanage once to play the role of parent during a Thanksgiving dinner so no child would sit by themselves. That single act of kindness had meant more than the man likely ever knew. And now, decades later, two strangers had unknowingly asked Ethan to be that person for them. Meanwhile, across town, Rachel Carter sat at her tiny kitchen table, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence. Bills lay scattered in front of her electric water rent. Her fingers traced the bold numbers on a new notice from her landlord. The rent was going up again effective next month. She closed her eyes, calculating the hours she'd need to add to make up the difference, knowing it would mean seeing even less of Lily and Grace. The guilt was like a stone in her chest, one she carried every day as she brewed coffee for strangers and served dinners to couples in warm, glowing restaurants she could never afford to dine in. Her daughters deserved so much more than this, but she was only one person fighting against an unforgiving tide. She didn't know, as she rubbed her temples and told herself to push through another shift, that fate had already set something in motion. Somewhere across the city, a man she hadn't seen in nearly 8 years, a man whose brief presence had left a lasting legacy she had tried to shield, was turning her daughter's plea over and over in his mind. Ethan set the postcard back in the box and sat down heavily on the edge of the bed. The memory of his own loneliness felt raw, a wound that never quite healed. The girls weren't his responsibility, he told himself again, but neither had he been the responsibility of that volunteer all those years ago. And still, someone had shown up for him, even if just for one day. It had mattered. It had given him something to hold on to when everything else felt hollow. He checked his phone. The meeting for Friday morning glared back at him from his schedule, the kind of event his board would consider non-negotiable. Ethan stared at it for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the screen. Then, with a quiet decisiveness that startled even him, he canceled it. As he powered off the phone, he glanced out the window again. The lights of Boston flickered against the darkening sky. A city full of strangers, but two faces stood out vividly in his mind. Grace, quiet and wide-eyed, clutching her worn backpack like it was armor. Lily, bold and stubborn, refusing to let the weight of the world bend her. He didn't know why their voices lingered, or why the idea of seeing them again felt like more than just an obligation. All he knew was this. When the curtains rose at Trinity Academy's Family Day, there would be two little girls scanning the audience, searching for a face. And no matter how absurd or inconvenient it seemed, Ethan Cole was going to make sure they found one looking back at them. The morning of Trinity Academy's Family Day dawned crisp and bright sunlight filtering through the budding branches along Beacon Hill. The halls of the school buzzed with anticipation, echoing with the laughter and chatter of parents carrying flowers and balloons, siblings clutching cameras, and teachers hurrying to shepherd excitable children into place. The auditorium smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers. A makeshift stage set with painted backdrops where each child would present their drawing and a short performance about their family. It was supposed to be a celebration of belonging, of love. For Lily and Grace Carter, it felt like a spotlight on their loneliness. Backstage, Lily tried to keep her chin high, pulling nervously at the hem of her hand-me-down dress, while Grace stood beside her clutching a rolled-up drawing so tightly that the paper had begun to crease. Neither spoke at first. The distant sound of laughter and applause from the auditorium felt like it belonged to another world, one they were just pretending to be part of. Grace finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of costumes. "Do you think he'll come?" Lily's gaze flickered to the floor. "I don't know," she said, trying to sound indifferent. "He didn't promise. People like him. They're busy. We shouldn't get our hopes up." Grace nodded, but her fingers twisted around the paper in her hands until Lily gently placed her own hand over them to still her sister. The teacher called for the kindergarten class to get ready, and the twins took their places in line. As the stage curtain began to rise, their eyes swept across the sea of faces in the dim auditorium. Row after row of families, some waving frantically, others recording with their phones, all smiling with pride. The familiar ache settled in their stomachs. There was no one for them, and then Grace nudged Lily sharply, her eyes wide. At the back of the auditorium, leaning casually against the wall as though he had slipped in at the last possible moment, stood Ethan Cole. He was dressed simply dark jacket, no tie, but his presence was unmistakable. He raised a hand and gave the twins a small, reassuring wave. It wasn't grand, it wasn't loud, but it was enough. The tension in their shoulders melted. For the first time that morning, both girls smiled, their faces lighting up as if someone had flipped a switch inside them. Lily stood a little taller, gripping her drawing with newfound confidence, while Grace's shy gaze shifted from the floor to the rows of faces beyond, no longer feeling invisible. When it was their turn, the twins stepped onto the stage side by side. Lily cleared her throat and spoke. First, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "This is our family," she said, holding up their colorful drawing. A small apartment, a smiling woman, and two identical girls. Grace took over, her voice soft but clear. "It's just our mom, Rachel. She works very hard so we can have everything we need. She couldn't be here today, but we know she loves us more than anything." They began to sing their song about family, their voices blending in perfect harmony. It was a simple melody, but it carried across the room like something bigger, fuller. And every time their eyes drifted toward the back of the auditorium, Ethan was there, clapping along softly, watching them with a focus that surprised even himself. When their performance ended, the applause was warm and polite from the rest of the audience, but Ethan's clapping was louder, sharper, as though to make up for every cheer they'd been missing. After the event, while other children leapt into their parents' arms and posed for photos, Lily and Grace slipped out of the crowd, unsure if approaching Ethan would somehow break the spell. But before they could hesitate too long, he crouched down to their level, meeting their eyes. "You were incredible," he said, simply, and meant it. "Do you have plans now?" Grace shook her head. "Mom's at work." Lily glanced up, cautious but curious. Why? Ethan tilted his head toward the door. "Because I know two girls who deserve to celebrate. Ever been to Boston Common?" The twins exchanged a look, their silent way of communicating, before Grace whispered, "No." "We always see it from the bus, though." Minutes later, they were walking along the winding paths of Boston Common, the city's oldest park alive with joggers, couples, and street performers. Ethan bought them each a towering swirl of ice cream which dripped down their fingers as they giggled at the sight of the swan boats gliding across the pond. For Grace, he picked up a small watercolor set from a vendor near the park. Her eyes had lingered on it just a second too long. And for Lily, he arranged for one of the boat operators to let her sit at the steering oar for a brief moment, her face glowing as the boat turned under her guidance. For Ethan, it was surreal. These weren't his daughters, not officially, not in any way that made logical sense. Yet, as he watched Grace carefully dip her brush into water to test the colors on a scrap of paper, and Lily's unrestrained laughter as the boat glided forward, something settled in his chest. He had been in boardrooms overlooking the Manhattan skyline, signing contracts worth billions, but he couldn't remember the last time he had felt present. Here, in a park with two little girls whose names he hadn't known 2 days ago, he felt something startlingly close to peace. What none of them knew was that a photographer for a local magazine out capturing scenes of spring in Boston had snapped a candid shot of the trio, Ethan crouched between Lily and Grace on a park bench, Grace showing him a quick sketch, Lily laughing mid-bite of her melting ice cream cone. By evening, the photo would be making its way online, captioned innocently as a heartwarming spring moment. Strangers would begin to wonder who the man with the twins was. and the quiet bond forming in the park would soon be anything but private. But for now, as the sun dipped lower and the swan boats made their final rounds, none of them cared about what came next. Lily and Grace leaned into Ethan's sides as they walked back toward the street, their sticky hands still clutching their ice cream cones, their voices bubbling with chatter about the day. Ethan glanced down at them listening, and found himself wondering, not for the first time in years, if maybe this day wasn't just changing their lives. It was changing his too. Rachel Carter's heart skipped a beat when she unlocked the apartment door and saw him. Ethan Cole was standing in the small living room, his tall frame almost comically out of place among the worn-out sofa, the scuffed coffee table, and the school drawings taped to the walls. Lily and Grace were buzzing around him like he'd been a part of their lives for years. Grace proudly holding up her latest watercolor, and Lily recounting how she'd steered a swan boat all by herself. For a moment, Rachel froze on the threshold, grocery bag in hand, as the sound of her daughter's laughter filled the room. It was a sound she loved, but rarely heard this bright, this unburdened. Then her gaze met Ethan's, and everything inside her turned rigid. He didn't know. That much was clear. He stood there with a polite smile, looking genuinely pleased to see her, his hands loosely clasped in front of him as Lily chattered about their day. But Rachel's pulse quickened, the kind of tight, panicked rhythm that came when the past she had buried threatened to claw its way back to the surface. She managed to force her lips into something resembling a smile as she set the bag on the counter. "Girls," she said evenly, "why don't you go change for dinner? I'll talk to Mr. Cole for a moment." The twins hesitated, their excitement dimming slightly, but Rachel's tone left no room for argument. Once they were in their shared bedroom, the apartment went eerily quiet. Ethan studied Rachel, sensing the sudden tension in the air. "I hope I'm not overstepping." He began, his voice calm but cautious. "They invited me in. I just didn't want them to be alone after today." Rachel crossed her arms, her back straight as a steel rod. "You've been very kind to them," she said carefully. "But I need to understand something, Mr. Cole. Why are you really here? You're not the type of man who lingers in Beacon Hill apartments or spends his afternoon buying watercolors for strangers." Ethan didn't flinch at her bluntness. "Maybe I'm not," he admitted, his voice softening. "But those two girls, they remind me of things I thought I'd forgotten. I know it's unusual me being here, but it doesn't feel wrong." His eyes, steady and searching, held hers, as if he were trying to read something deeper in her reaction. "You look like you know me," he added, almost as an afterthought. "Have we met before?" Rachel's fingers curled against her arms, nails digging into her skin to keep her composure. "No," she lied smoothly, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. "You're just familiar, because you're in the news. You're everywhere." She turned away, busying herself by unpacking groceries. The less he saw of her face, the better. But the world had a way of undoing the walls she had so carefully built. The following week, Ethan returned not once, but several times. Each visit started with something small, dropping off new sneakers after noticing Lily's sole was peeling, bringing Grace a set of sketching pencils when he learned she liked to draw, helping them with math homework when Rachel's shifts kept her late. Rachel's instinct was to resist, to tell him to leave, to protect the fragile life she had built. Yet each time she saw her daughters' faces light up when Ethan walked through the door, her resolve weakened. One afternoon he took them to the Museum of Fine Arts, where Grace sat on the floor sketching statues with the concentration of someone twice her age, and Lily raced through the aviation exhibit, insisting on testing every flight simulator. They came home with cheeks flushed from excitement, their stories spilling over each other. Rachel listened quietly, her heart tightening with each passing day. She had spent 7 years being enough for them, barely enough, but enough, And now this man with his careful smile and unintentional charm was giving them a taste of something she couldn't. Stability, attention, a figure they could proudly point to and call Dad even if only in secret. Then, as if fate wanted to quicken her anxiety, the photo from Boston Common appeared online. A local magazine had shared it on their website, captioning it, "Billionaire CEO shares a sweet spring moment with 2 local kids." Its spread quickly picked up by social media and gossip blogs, sparking curiosity. Who were the twins? Why was Ethan Cole, a man whose life usually orbited high-rises and boardrooms, crouched on a park bench laughing with 2 schoolgirls Rachel found out when a co-worker at the restaurant shoved her phone under her nose, whispering, "Isn't this your girls?" Her blood ran cold. The photo was innocent, but the attention wasn't. It was only a matter of time before someone dug deeper. She could no longer ignore the truth she'd kept locked away. That night, after Lily and Grace had gone to bed, Rachel sat across from Ethan at the cramped kitchen table, the hum of the old refrigerator filling the silence. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "We've met before," she said finally, her voice low but unwavering. 8 years ago. New York Public Library Gala. I was working as a server. You were celebrating some deal drinking too much. We spent one night together." She paused, her eyes locking on his, daring him to piece it together. "Lily and Grace are your daughters." For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His face didn't harden with anger, nor did it soften with easy acceptance. It was the face of a man sifting through memories, dragging up details he hadn't realized mattered until now. Slowly, recognition flickered in his eyes. "The gala," he murmured. You dropped a tray near the mezzanine. I offered to pay for it." He exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair as the weight of the revelation settled. "They're mine." Rachel nodded, once her throat tight. "I didn't know how to find you when I found out I was pregnant. And when I did, when I realized who you were, not just a stranger in a suit, but Ethan Cole, I panicked. I thought you'd take them from me, or think I was after your money, or, worst of all, that you wouldn't care at all." Ethan's eyes flicked toward the closed bedroom door behind which 2 little girls slept, soundly unaware that their lives had just shifted. And now he asked quietly. Rachel swallowed hard. "Now they know you, they like you, and I don't know which is scarier, that you'll leave or that you'll stay and change everything." Her voice trembled despite her best efforts to sound resolute. "Either way, they can't be the ones to get hurt." The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence again. Ethan's hands rested flat on the table, his gaze steady. For the first time in years, neither of them had an easy answer. And for the first time since she met him, Rachel realized she wasn't afraid of Ethan Cole because of who he was. She was afraid because of what he might mean for her daughters and for her heart. For 6 days, Ethan Cole vanished from Beacon Hill as if the earth had swallowed him. No visits, no calls, not even a message. Each day, Lily and Grace waited by the kitchen window, or on the cracked stoop outside their apartment, their chatter quieter, their glances toward the street growing more frequent. Rachel told them he was busy, that grown-ups sometimes needed time to figure things out. But each night as she tucked them into bed, she could see the question in their eyes. Was he gone for good? On the 7th day, the sun was dipping below the Boston skyline when a familiar black car pulled up across the street. Ethan stepped out looking more worn than they'd ever seen him, dark circles beneath his eyes, his jaw set in determination. But the moment he saw the twins perched on the low brick wall, his expression softened. He crossed the street slowly, as though careful not to break whatever fragile hope lingered there. The girls didn't run to him at first. They sat still, their faces uncertain. Only when Ethan knelt before them, lowering himself to their eye level, did Lily finally speak. Her voice, usually bold and steady, came out in a near whisper. "We thought you didn't want to be our dad anymore." The words sliced through him more sharply than any corporate betrayal ever had. "No," he said quickly, his voice thick but firm. "Never think that. Not for a second." He held out his hands, one to each girl, and after a heartbeat of hesitation, they took them. "I had to take care of some important things," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "to make sure I can keep the promises I want to make to you." Grace tilted her head, her brow furrowing. "What promises?" He smiled faintly, exhaustion tugging at the corners of his mouth. "The kind that last forever," he said softly. "I don't want to just be the man who shows up sometimes. I want to be your dad, for real. I want my name on your birth certificates. I want to be there for every school project, every birthday, every day you need me." His gaze flicked between their wide, tear-bright eyes. "If you'll have me." The dam broke then. Lily threw her arms around his neck, and Grace followed, quieter but just as fierce. They clung to him like they'd been holding their breath all week, and Ethan held them just as tightly, his own eyes closing, as he let the weight of it all sink in. For the first time in years, he felt something unshakable, something no boardroom or bank account could offer the certainty that he belonged somewhere with someone. Rachel had been watching from the doorway, her arms crossed her face, unreadable. When Ethan finally looked up, still holding both girls, he extended a hand toward her. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic pleas, just a quiet steadiness in his gaze. She hesitated only for a moment before stepping forward and taking his hand. The next day, Ethan brought them to a quiet neighborhood near Cambridge where the streets were lined with maples, and the houses stood with wide porches and sunlit windows. He stopped in front of a 2-story home with a wraparound porch and a yard big enough for the twins to run until they were breathless. "I bought this for us," he said simply as the front door swung open. "If you want it. A place where Lily and Grace can each have their own room. A yard where they can build a treehouse. A studio where Grace can paint. A kitchen big enough for all of us to have breakfast together without bumping elbows." Rachel's eyes widened as she stepped inside, her fingers brushing over the polished banister, the light spilling across the hardwood floors. "Ethan, this is too much." "No," he said quietly, meeting her gaze. "For 7 years you carried everything alone. You gave them everything you could, even when it meant breaking yourself in the process. Let me do this for them and for you, not because I have money, because they're my daughters. And you've both been my family longer than I realized." Lily and Grace came tumbling down the stairs, their laughter echoing through the empty house. "Mom, there's a huge tree in the backyard," Lily exclaimed, grabbing Rachel's hand. "Can we really live here?" Rachel looked between them, their hopeful faces, Ethan's steady expression, the sunlight spilling across the room. For years, every instinct had told her to survive by keeping her guard up, by expecting nothing from anyone. But looking at her daughters, at the man who had returned not out of obligation but choice, something inside her finally eased. She nodded. "Yes, if that's what everyone wants." The girls screamed with delight, racing back up the stairs, already planning treehouses and painted walls. Rachel turned to Ethan, her eyes glistening. "Are you sure about this? About us?" He reached for her hand again, his voice low but certain. "I've never been more sure of anything. No deal I've ever made, no company I've built will ever matter more than this." Weeks later, at the Trinity Academy Science Fair, Lily and Grace stood proudly beside their colorful water cycle model, Ethan on one side, Rachel on the other. When the teacher asked them to introduce their project, Lily grinned and said, "Our dad helped us build this," her voice ringing through the auditorium with unmistakable pride. Grace added softly, and now he helps us with everything." As the applause filled the room, the twins threw their arms around Ethan's waist, and he bent down to kiss the tops of their heads. "Good thing we found you," Lily whispered into his jacket. "Now you don't have to pretend to be our dad anymore." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He pulled them closer, his voice a murmur only they could hear. "I never have to pretend again. You're my girls forever." And for the first time in his life, the man who had thought he had everything finally realized he had been missing the only thing that mattered, a family of his own. Life has a strange way of pulling together people who were never meant to cross paths, or so it seems. For 7 years, Rachel Carter carried the weight of raising Lily and Grace alone, in their small Beacon Hill apartment, sacrificing her own comfort and sleep to keep food on the table and hope in her daughters' hearts. Every day was a balancing act between 2 jobs, unpaid bills, and quiet nights where the twins' laughter felt muted by exhaustion. Yet, in the chaos of Boston's busy streets, one chance encounter between 2 little girls, desperate not to stand alone on stage, and a man who had long forgotten what it meant to truly belong, changed everything. Ethan Cole was the type of man who by every measure already had everything. His name graced business headlines, his wealth afforded him any luxury, and his life was meticulously orchestrated by schedules and obligations. But beneath the polished exterior, he was still the boy from the Pine Grove orphanage, the one who sat on cold metal chairs during recitals, clutching handmade crafts while watching other kids run into their parents' arms. That wound, buried under years of success, was reopened the moment Lily and Grace asked him to simply be their dad for one day, a request so small yet powerful enough to unravel a life built on transactions and deals. What began as a single act of kindness, standing at the back of an auditorium, so 2 little girls didn't have to feel invisible, turned into a bond that neither Ethan nor Rachel could ignore. From afternoons spent in Boston Common to quiet moments in a cramped kitchen where truths finally surfaced, Ethan discovered that the twins weren't just children he felt responsible for. They were his own daughters, the result of a fleeting connection from years past, a connection Rachel had hidden out of fear of rejection, of losing them, of facing a man whose world seemed far removed from hers. In the weeks that followed, fear gave way to something else. Ethan didn't run, as Rachel had braced herself for. Instead, he chose to rewrite all their lives. He became more than the man who clapped from the back row. He became the father who drove them to school, who built models for science fairs, who carved out time not because it was convenient, but because it mattered. He gave them a home, a place where they could dream beyond the walls of a small apartment, and gave Rachel a partner, not in wealth, but in the quiet moments of raising 2 spirited, curious girls. This story reminds us that family isn't always born from perfect plans or predictable paths. Sometimes it's forged in the unlikeliest of meetings and small acts of compassion that grow into unbreakable bonds. It teaches us that even the busiest lives, the most guarded hearts, can find meaning and connection. For anyone listening, it's a call to look beyond the chaos of schedules and success to recognize that the greatest fulfillment often comes not from what we build for ourselves, but what we choose to build with others. In our own lives, this lesson can be applied every day. Take the time to be present for those who need you, even if it's inconvenient. Reach out to those who might be standing on their own, because the smallest gesture, a smile, a seat in the crowd, a hand held when no one else offers, one can change a life. And never underestimate how unexpected connections can lead you to the family, the love, or the purpose you didn't even know you were missing. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness, connection, and second chances, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that inspire and move you, and it gives us the motivation to bring you even more powerful, heartfelt narratives. Stay tuned, because sometimes the most extraordinary stories are the ones waiting just around the corner.